I never thought I'd end up in a courtroom battle because of a tree. But not just any tree. This was a 150-year-old oak that stood tall on my property, a living monument to history, shade, and stubborn resilience. To me, it was priceless. To my HOA Karen of a neighbor, it was nothing more than an eyesore that dropped too many leaves and blocked her precious view of the cul-de-sac. For months, she nagged, threatened, and shoved violation letters into my mailbox, demanding I cut it down. I refused. It was healthy, protected by law, and frankly none of her business. That's when she did the unthinkable. She hired her own crew to cut it down, without my permission, without a permit. And here's the kicker. When the mighty oak finally fell, it didn't damage my home. No, it crashed straight into hers, caving in her roof and smashing her car. You'd think that'd be karma enough. But instead, Karen had the audacity to sue me. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far these HOA stories travel. When people ask me what kind of neighborhood I live in, I usually laugh before I answer. It's one of those places where the lawns are manicured within an inch of their lives. The mailboxes are color-coded, and every driveway has to be washed down once a week, or else you'll find a little love letter from the HOA tucked under the lives. Your windshield wiper. On paper, it's supposed to be exclusive and upscale. In reality, it's a petty battleground where middle-aged adults act like playground bullies only. Instead of fighting over toys, they fight over property lines, mailbox heights, and the number of garden gnomes you're allowed to own. I moved here with my wife and kids because the schools were good, the houses were solid, and the streets looked safe enough for bike rides in the summer evenings. What I didn't realize was that I was buying into a circus. And like every circus, there was a ringmaster. In our neighborhood, that ringmaster was none other than Karen, our self-proclaimed queen of the cul-de-sac. You could spot Karen a mile away, short blonde bob that looked like it was sculpted from plastic, a neon-colored cardigan wrapped around her like armor, and that infamous HOA clipboard always clutched in one hand like a sheriff's badge. She didn't just attend the HOA meetings, she ran them. And she didn't just run them, she weaponized them. If there was a rule, she'd twist it. If there wasn't a rule, she'd make one up on the spot. Now, normally I don't care much for neighborhood drama. I keep my head down, mow my lawn, wave to the mailman, and go about my business. But Karen had a special obsession with my property. Specifically with the massive oak tree that towered in my front yard. This tree wasn't just any tree. It was over a century and a half old, older than every house in the neighborhood combined. My grandfather used to tell me stories about how settlers in the area once rested under it, how kids from 3 generations before me carved their initials into its thick bark, how storms rolled through but never managed to bring it down. To me, it was a guardian, a living relic. To Karen, it was enemy number one. The first time she brought it up was at an HOA meeting. She stood up in front of everyone, wagged her finger at me, and said, "That tree is a menace. It blocks sunlight, sheds too many leaves, and frankly, it lowers the property value of my home." I nearly choked on my coffee. Lowered her property value. Because of shade, half the neighborhood actually appreciated the tree's canopy in the blazing summer months. But Karen wasn't one for logic. She was one for drama. The next week, I found a notice taped to my front door. A violation slip claiming I was neglecting hazardous vegetation. Hazardous vegetation, it was a perfectly healthy oak. I had it inspected by an arborist the year before, who assured me the tree was as strong as ever. Still, the HOA's little paper threats kept piling up. Every day I'd come home from work, and there it was another warning about leaf litter, another complaint about blocked visibility, another claim that squirrels nesting in the branches were somehow an infestation I was responsible for. I started joking with my wife that Karen had a personal vendetta, not against me, but against the entire oak species. But the longer it went on, the less funny it became. She wasn't just sending notices, she was rallying neighbors. At block parties, she'd corner people whispering about how dangerous my tree was. I even overheard her telling one family that if the tree ever fell, it would crush their roof too, and that I was too selfish to do anything about it. The irony was rich, because if anyone in the neighborhood was selfish, it was Karen. She was the same woman who once threw a tantrum because the trash collectors wouldn't walk onto her lawn to grab her bins. She had a husband and 2 grown sons who were perfectly capable, but apparently lifting a garbage lid was beneath them. So she stormed into the HOA office and demanded special accommodations. That's the kind of neighbor I was dealing with. Entitlement wrapped in a cardigan. Still, I tried to play nice. I invited her over for coffee once, thinking maybe if she saw the tree, from my perspective, the history, the beauty, she'd back down. She showed up, glanced at it for all of 2 seconds, and said, "You know, if you really cared about the neighborhood, you'd cut it down and put in a fountain instead? Something tasteful." That's when I realized this wasn't about safety or property values. This was about control. Karen couldn't stand that something so magnificent existed outside her authority. She wanted the tree gone because I wanted it to stay. That was reason enough for her. The real tipping point came one autumn evening. The wind was calm, the leaves were golden, and I was out raking with my son. Karen marched across the street, hands on her hips, and announced, "If you don't take care of that tree, I'll take matters into my own hands." I laughed it off, but her glare told me she wasn't joking. My son asked if she was going to hurt the tree, and I reassured him nothing would happen. I told him the tree had stood for 150 years and would stand for 150 more. Little did I know I was wrong, because when Karen said she'd take matters into her own hands, she meant it. And the fallout from that single act of arrogance would tear through the entire neighborhood, drag us all into court, and leave her life and her house in splinters. But at the time, all I saw was a neighbor with too much free time and an unhealthy obsession with a tree. I didn't realize she was about to cross a line that no HOA rulebook could ever save her from. If you've ever lived next to a Karen, you know they don't back down. The word no isn't a dead end, it's fuel. It's like telling a toddler they can't have candy and then leaving them in the candy aisle. That's exactly what happened after I refused to cut down the oak tree. Karen went from mildly annoying to full-blown obsessive. At first, it was the constant stream of violation slips. I'd wake up to find yet another letter taped to my door. Failure to maintain vegetation, hazardous obstruction, community safety risk. Every one of them signed off by Karen with a flourish, like she thought her signature carried the weight of the law. My wife and I started joking about it. We'd collect them in a binder we labeled Karen's Greatest Hits. But humor only carries you so far. Pretty soon Karen wasn't content with just sending notices. She wanted an audience. At the next HOA meeting, she practically stormed the podium. She held up photos she had taken of my tree, close-ups of fallen acorns, a squirrel running across a branch, a single twig that had fallen onto her driveway, as if they were damning evidence in a murder trial. "This tree is a menace to our community," she shouted, waving the photos like a prosecutor. "Look at this debris, look at these animals. Do you want your children to be attacked by rabid squirrels? Do you want your homes crushed when this tree inevitably falls?" The room murmured, but not with agreement. Most of the neighbors rolled their eyes. A few even smirked. But Karen was relentless. She glared at me as if daring me to respond. So I did. Calmly, I stood up and said, "Karen, this tree has been here for 150 years. It has withstood storms bigger than your ego. If it hasn't fallen by now, I think we're safe." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Karen's face flushed red. And from that day forward, she made it her personal mission to prove me wrong. Over the following weeks, her antics escalated. She started photographing my property daily, lurking behind bushes with her phone out like some dollar store paparazzi. One evening, I caught her pacing around the tree with a tape measure, muttering numbers under her breath as if she was preparing an engineering report. Another time, I saw her waving down a passing police cruiser, trying to convince the officer to inspect the tree. The officer gave me an apologetic look, shook his head, and drove off. It wasn't just me noticing anymore. Neighbors started talking. Some joked that Karen was more obsessed with my tree than with her own family. One even told me, "Man, I think she dreams about that oak at night." But the real kicker came one rainy afternoon. I was inside working from home when I heard shouting outside. I looked out the window and saw Karen in her yard umbrella clutched in one hand, gesturing wildly at the tree with the other. She was yelling at a poor city worker who had come by to check a utility pole. "You need to condemn this tree," she barked. "It's dangerous. It's on the verge of collapse." The city worker looked up confused. "Ma'am, that's a healthy oak. There's no sign of disease or rot." Karen huffed, "Are you a tree expert? Because I've been documenting this for months." I nearly spit out my coffee. She had been documenting, all right, dozens of blurry photos of leaves and squirrels. I walked outside and asked the worker if everything was all right. He shrugged, said tree's fine, and left. Karen glared at me like I'd bribed him personally. From then on, she doubled down. Letters to the HOA board, emails to City Hall, phone calls to anyone who would listen. She even tried to start a petition titled, "Save the Neighborhood, Remove the Oak." Only 2 people signed it, her husband and her sister-in-law who lived 3 towns over. Still, she refused to give up. I began noticing her sneaking into my yard at odd hours. Once at nearly midnight, I caught her standing near the tree with a flashlight staring up at its branches like she expected it to come crashing down on command. When I asked her what she was doing, she snapped, "I'm gathering evidence," and stormed back to her house. My wife was starting to get nervous. "She's unhinged," she said one night. "What if she actually does something to the tree?" I reassured her, maybe too confidently, that Karen wouldn't dare. After all, it was illegal to cut down a protected tree. There were fines, permits, even criminal charges in some cases. Surely even Karen wouldn't be reckless enough to take it that far. But in hindsight, I should have known better. This was a woman who once built an illegal fence on my property line just because she believed the land was hers. This was a woman who argued with the garbage collectors because she thought they should do her chores. Logic didn't apply to Karen, rules didn't apply to Karen. Looking back, I realized the signs were all there. The late-night inspections, the frantic photos, the angry rants at meetings. She wasn't just obsessed with my tree, she was plotting. The final warning came a few days before it all went down. Karen cornered me at the mailbox, jabbing her finger in my chest. "If you don't do something about that tree," she hissed, "don't be surprised when someone else does." I remember shaking my head, muttering, "That's not how property works, Karen," and walking away. But her words stuck with me, because in less than a week someone did do something, and that someone was Karen herself. What she set in motion would not only destroy my tree, but also unravel her entire life. And when it was over, she wouldn't just lose her battle against me, she'd lose her home, her money, and the last shred of credibility she ever had in this neighborhood. But at the time, I had no idea. I thought she was just blowing hot air. I thought the oak was untouchable. I thought the law would keep her in check. I was wrong. I woke to the kind of sound that rips you straight out of sleep, the high metallic whine of a chainsaw chewing through something thick. For 2 heartbeats, I didn't process it. My mind tried to file it under neighbor, trimming hedges, or someone doing early yard work. Then a second chainsaw kicked in deeper, angrier, and the house gave a faint, unfamiliar tremor like a bass note played under the floor. My stomach went cold. I threw on jeans, grabbed the first t-shirt I could find, and bolted down the hall. My wife stepped out of the bedroom, eyes wide. "Is that?" I know I said already moving. I snatched my phone from the kitchen counter and sprinted out the front door barefoot. Dawn hadn't fully broken yet, but the street wore that blue-gray light that makes everything look like a crime scene. And there they were, 3 men, in mismatched work clothes, no company logos, no safety cones, nothing professional, clustered around my oak. An old white pickup idled at the curb, its tailgate down a tangle of ropes and rusty gas cans rattling in the bed. One guy stood on a ladder, leaned into my tree at a reckless angle, helmet strap dangling loose under his chin. Another fed a chainsaw through a gorgeous living limb, as if he were slicing a loaf of bread. The third man, a stocky one with a cigarette in his mouth, watched like a foreman, arms crossed, no eye protection, no harnesses on anyone. "HEY," I roared. "Get off my property." The cigarette didn't flinch. He just turned his head and shouted, "Cut faster." The saws screamed. A length of branch thicker than my thigh shuddered, separated, and plummeted, smashing into my lawn with a gut-sick thud. Wet sawdust glittered in the air like obscene confetti. My oak shivered. If a tree could wince, mine did. "What are you doing?" I yelled closer now. "This tree is protected. You don't have a permit. This is my land." "Ma'am hired us," the ladder guy called back without looking down. Said it's her tree on her property. Said urgent removal. "Ma'am," I snapped. "Who?" Emmy, a voice snapped from my right. "Karen, of course." She stood on her driveway in a pink cardigan like a general at dawn, arms folded over her clipboard. Her husband lurked a step behind, hands jammed in his pockets, eyes glued to his shoes. Karen's expression was carved from ice. "You had months to take care of your hazard," she said, crisp, loud enough for the entire cul-de-sac to hear. "The board has documented numerous violations. We're resolving the safety issue for the community." My heart pounded against my ribs. "You are trespassing. Call them off right now, or I'm calling the police." "You do that," she said, smug. "But by then the danger will be removed." I hit 911. While it rang, I started filming, panning across the men, the truck, the ladder, the sawdust, the base of the oak, the property marker staked 2 feet from the trunk. The dispatcher answered. I gave our address, said the words trespassing and illegal tree removal and no permit, and she said officers were on their way. Cut the main cigarette man barked. "We're burning daylight." The guy on the ladder revved his chainsaw again, planted his boots, and began a horizontal cut where the trunk widened like a knee. The sound bored straight through my skull. Sappled, golden, and sticky, the oak trembled leaves, shivering like a living thing, in pain. "Stop!" I shouted, voice cracking. "You're going to kill it." That earned me a single glance, flat indifferent. Then the saw went deeper. The third man threw a rope around the trunk and looped it back to the pickup as if they planned to drag the fall. Everything about it was wrong. No wedges to control the drop. No spotter calling wind. No traffic cones. No street clearance. No neighbor notification. just brute force and arrogance. Neighbors emerged in pajamas drawn by the noise. A couple down the street clutched coffee mugs like talismans. Two kids in superhero pajamas stood on their porch open-mouthed until their mother pulled them inside. Someone whispered, "Is that even legal?" Someone else said, "That tree's protected." And Karen, basking in the attention, announced, "The board authorized an emergency response." "The board did not authorize trespassing on private property," I shot back. "And they definitely didn't authorize lying to contractors about whose land this is." She lifted her chin. "Dispute it later. Safety now." Another limb went. The ladder wobbled. The man riding it laughed high and reckless. Cigarette Man spat into my grass. The rope tightened to the bumper of the idling pickup, which coughed diesel smoke into the morning like a dragon with emphysema. I moved to the base of the tree, filming the cut line, the shape of the notch, the fresh fan of sawdust furring my lawn, the metal property stake narrating into the camera. "This is my property," I said, voice steady, even though my hands shook. "There is no permit displayed. There is no city tag. There was no storm last night. This is a healthy, protected oak. My neighbor Karen," I panned, "has hired unlicensed workers to remove it without consent." The saw bit deeper. I could smell hot chain oil and sap and the mineral tang of earth. I swear the air pressure changed. Birds exploded from the canopy, shrieking. Timber ladder guy crowed. The trunk gave a long, grieving groan, the kind of sound you feel through your feet. The entire crown leaned slow as a ship in a swell, but it didn't lean toward my yard. It leaned toward Karen's house. Time stretched thin. I heard someone, maybe me, shout, "No, no, no." The pickup's engine revved. The ropes snapped, taut, and then snapped outright with a sound like a gunshot. The top of the oak pivoted with lazy inevitability, a 50-foot lever drawn by gravity and hubris. Karen took one step backward. That clipboard clutched to her chest like it could shield her from physics. Her husband dove left. The men scrambled. And then the crown met the roof first, a crack of shingles, then an avalanche of limbs and leaves and pounding trunk. The gable folded like paper. Windows shattered in a glittering scream. Somewhere inside the house, a low, terrible crunch announced the death of a load-bearing wall. The ground shuddered. A car alarm began to wail. The chainsaws went mercifully silent. Nobody spoke for a heartbeat. 2, 3. Then the cul-de-sac erupted. Karen shrieked a raw animal sound that I frankly never expected to hear from the queen of bylaws. "My house, you, this is your fault." She whirled on me, finger stabbing the air like a dagger. "Your tree, your liability, you're paying for all of this." I stared at her, the wild hair, the blotchy cheeks, the shock fighting with fury in her eyes, and felt something I did not expect: grief. Not for her roof, for my oak, my guardian, reduced to a disaster site by a woman who couldn't stand shade. I looked down at my phone and realized I'd never stopped filming. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing fast. The unlicensed trio swung into motion, suddenly frantic, yanking at ropes, kicking at the ladder, one of them already hauling gear toward the truck. "We're out," Cigarette Man barked. Karen spun to them. "You are not going anywhere. You finish this. You fix." She gestured at the gaping roof like she expected them to reverse time with a reciprocating saw. "The job's done," Cigarette said. He flicked his cigarette into my grass, my bare foot stomped it instinctively, and he hopped into the passenger side. The driver floored it. They jerked forward, tailgate banging. I managed to capture the license plate as they fishtailed away, dragging a length of rope like a snake. A police cruiser swung onto the streetlights, pulsing red and blue against the leaves lodged in Karen's gutters. The officer stepped out, took one look at the scene tree through roof neighbors in slippers, me barefoot with a phone, and let out a breath like a man who'd seen everything and somehow still couldn't believe this. "Everyone okay?" he called. "No," Karen screeched, running toward him. "Arrest him. His tree destroyed my home. He refused to remove a known hazard. I have documentation. He's been negligent. My insurance, my property value." "Ma'am," the officer said, holding up a hand. "I'm going to need one person speaking at a time." I raised my phone. "Officer, I have video of unlicensed workers cutting my protected oak on my property without a permit or my consent. The base cut is on my lawn. There was no weather event. I have the license plate of the truck that fled. I can show you the property marker." He looked between us, weighing the way good cops do when the loudest voice isn't the truest. "Let's start with identification and statements. Sir, step over here. Ma'am, you too." We separated like boxers to opposite corners. As I walked the officer to the stump, I narrated the timeline, the chainsaws at dawn, Karen's declaration, the lack of city signage, the cut shape, the snapped rope, the fall. He crouched, studied the stump, ran a fingertip through the fresh sawdust. "That's a clean cut," he said. "Not Withrow." "Correct," I said softly, throat tight. He took my phone, watched a minute of video, and nodded. "Send me a copy." He scribbled the plate I'd captured. On the other side of the yard, Karen performed outrage like it was opera. She jabbed at the ruined roof at me at the heavens. He's been told repeatedly, "I have letters, I have minutes, this was an emergency." The officer asked, "Do you have a permit for removal?" Karen hesitated. It was small, but it was there. The board, "A city permit, ma'am." Silence. Then brittle. It was urgent. The second cruiser pulled up, then a third. A fire truck groaned onto the street to assess structural safety. The cul-de-sac filled with uniforms and cameras and whispering neighbors. My wife slipped her hand into mine. I realized I was still barefoot and finally felt the cold seeping up through my heels. "Sir," another officer said, "joining us, we'll need you to email that video, any photos, and the contact information for your HOA. We'll also need to contact the city's arborist regarding the protected status." I nodded and kept taking pictures, close-ups of the cut plane, wide shots showing the stump in relation to the property marker, the truck tracks, the dangling rope scar on the bumper mark in the street. Evidence was the only language anyone would believe once the shouting started. Karen's husband finally spoke, voice small. Can we at least get the tree off the house?" The fire captain shook his head. "Not until the structure's assessed. It's load-bearing now, paradoxically. Remove it wrong and the rest of your roof could go. We'll tarp what we can." Karen turned that fury back on me. "You will pay for this," she hissed. "Hotel repairs everything, and I will sue." I met her eyes. Something in me, something that had been taught to be polite, to be neighborly, went very still. "You hired them," I said. "You lied to them about the boundary. You trespassed. You cut my tree." "It's your tree," she snapped. "Your responsibility." A brittle laugh escaped me. "You don't get to start a fire and then invoice the nearest hydrant." Her mouth opened and closed. For once, no clipboard rule could save her. By noon, the street looked like a staged diorama of consequences. Caution tape around the stump tarps over Karen's roof, officers interviewing neighbors 2 by 2, the HOA president arriving pale and sweating, already practicing distance. Did not authorize this, we had no knowledge, while Karen seethed beside him like a storm cloud that had forgotten how to rain. The city arborist finally arrived, a woman with kind eyes and a voice that treated trees like patients. She touched the stump the way a doctor checks a pulse. "Healthy," she said. "Very healthy. Approximately 150 years. Removal would have required a permit, an impact plan, and an approved contractor." She looked at me. "I'm sorry," and she meant it. I nodded, jaw tight. "Me too." As afternoon slid toward evening, the adrenaline ebbed and the ache set in. I stood in the mottled shade that shouldn't have been gone and felt the grief again. Not explosive this time, heavy. The kind that settles in the ribs and waits. Karen caught my eye across the tape and mouthed, "I'll ruin you." But the thing about truth is, it doesn't need to raise its voice. It just stands there undeniable, with sawdust at its feet and a roof full of branches that fell exactly where arrogance aimed them. That night, after the last cruiser left and the last neighbor retreated to their dinner table gossip, I sat on my porch steps with my laptop. I backed up every photo and second of video to 3 different drives and a cloud folder. I wrote a timeline while it was fresh. I emailed the officers. I sent a certified letter to the HOA and copied the city. I called a lawyer. He listened quietly, asked 3 sharp questions, and said, "We'll be ready." Ready for what I asked, though I already knew. "For when she sues you," he said, "and for when we counter." I looked at the stump, clean, obscene, undeniable, and felt something else under the grief. Small but steady. Resolve. Karen had finally taken matters into her own hands. Now it was my turn. If there's one thing you should know about HOA Karens, it's this: when they're caught red-handed, they don't back down. They double down. I thought maybe naively that watching her roof collapse under the very tree she ordered chopped would knock some sense into her. That maybe the universe had handed her such a poetic dose of karma that she'd crawl back into her pink cardigan shell and keep quiet for once in her life. But no. Within 48 hours, I was served with papers. A lawsuit. Karen was suing me. The officer who delivered the envelope gave me a sympathetic look, the kind that says, "Yeah, buddy, I know this is insane, but I don't write the rules." I tore it open at the kitchen table, my wife leaning over my shoulder. The words blurred together at first. Negligence, hazardous tree, property damage, hotel expenses, emotional distress. I had to laugh. It was so absurd it almost read like satire. She claimed my 150-year-old oak was a known danger I willfully ignored, resulting in catastrophic damage to her home and trauma to her family. She wanted me to pay for the repairs, the removal of the tree, her hotel stay, her meals, her car repairs, and this was my favorite compensation for the emotional anguish of being displaced. My wife stared at me, horrified. She actually thinks she can pin this on you. She doesn't just think it, I said. She's betting on it. This is classic Karen. She causes chaos, then blames everyone else. I called my lawyer that same day. He skimmed the documents, chuckled, and said, "Don't panic. This is a scare tactic. But we'll need to hit back hard." "Skade taktik?" I asked. "She's hoping you'll settle. People like her thrive on intimidation. She'll file posture and pray you give in to avoid a court battle. Don't. We'll answer formally, then counter." It should have reassured me, but the stress crept in anyway. A lawsuit isn't a parking ticket. It's long, expensive, exhausting, and Karen knew it. That week was a blur of depositions, letters, and meetings. Karen strutted around the neighborhood like she'd already won, clipboard in hand, stopping neighbors to announce that I'd be paying through the nose. Her husband hammered plywood over their roof, and every time I walked by, Karen would point dramatically at the tarp and say, "See what your negligence did." Some neighbors started whispering. A few believed her. Others avoided me altogether, too afraid to get caught in the crossfire. HOA drama has a way of polarizing people. The HOA board, for their part, tried to play neutral. The president called me privately and said, "We didn't sanction her actions. The HOA is not liable." He sounded more worried about his own reputation than justice. Meanwhile, Karen's campaign grew louder. She printed copies of her lawsuit and slipped them into mailboxes like propaganda flyers. She posted on the community Facebook group about a selfish neighbor who endangered us all. One night, she even taped a handwritten sign to her front door, "Victim of negligence, ask me about it." It was laughable, but it was also infuriating. My lawyer kept me steady. Let her dig the hole. The more she talks, the more contradictions we'll have to work with. And contradictions were already piling up. Remember how on the day of the fall, Karen screamed to the police that the tree had simply toppled because I refused to remove it? Well, in her official complaint, she changed the story. Now she claimed I had secretly hired an unlicensed crew to cut the tree. They botched the job, and I ran back into my house while they fled. It was almost comical. Did she forget I had been on vacation? Did she forget she herself screamed? I hired them in front of half the cul-de-sac? We gathered everything: the video I'd taken, the time-stamped photos, the property marker, the police report, the arborist's early notes. My wife dug up the receipts from our vacation hotel invoices, dated attraction tickets, selfies with my kids at a water park 4 hours away on the very morning the chainsaws roared, an alibi stronger than steel. When Karen's lawyer saw the stack of evidence, he tried a different tactic. He filed motions to delay. He requested endless documents. He tried to bury us in paperwork, hoping we'd cave. But all it did was make my lawyer's eyes sparkle. "We'll bill her for every wasted hour," he said. The depositions were where the cracks really showed. Karen sat across the table from me, pastel sweater draped like armor, eyes narrowed to slits. Her lawyer asked her to describe the day of the incident. She launched into her performance tears, shaking hands, claims that she begged me for months to take action. And on the morning of the accident, her lawyer prompted, "What did you observe?" Karen sniffled. "I saw strange men cutting the tree. He must have hired them. They destroyed my roof, my car, my life." My lawyer slid a stack of photos across the table, images of Karen standing smugly in her driveway that morning, barking orders at the crew. Images neighbors had snapped on their phones. Karen froze. Her lawyer cleared his throat. "Objection. Lack of foundation." "Foundation is right there," my lawyer said, calmly tapping the photo. "Taken at 7:42 a.m., time-stamped? That's you, Mrs. Peterson, is it not?" She stammered, I don't recall." "And yet you recall seeing my client hire the men, even though he was hundreds of miles away, as evidenced by these receipts." He held up our vacation documents like a winning poker hand. Karen's cheeks burned crimson. She muttered something about not being good with dates. It only got worse. When pressed about permits, she admitted she hadn't filed for one. When asked how she found the crew, she admitted they were recommended by a friend of a friend and paid in cash. No contracts, no insurance. When asked why she told police at first that the tree fell naturally, she blurted, "Because I didn't think they'd understand." By the end of the session, her lawyer looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. But even then, Karen didn't stop. Outside the courthouse, she cornered me. "You're ruining me," she hissed. "You think this makes you some kind of hero. You think people will thank you for taking my home away." I stared at her, exhausted but resolute. "You ruined yourself, Karen. You cut down a 150-year-old tree that wasn't yours, and you tried to lie your way out of it. That's on you." Her eyes blazed, but there was fear under the fire now. The kind of fear that creeps in when even you start to realize your lies can't stretch far enough to cover reality. The next day, my lawyer filed the counterclaim trespass. Destruction of property damages for the value of the oak. The number shocked even me. Hundreds of thousands. Enough to not just fix her roof, but to crush her pride. Word spread quickly. Neighbors who'd wavered began drifting back to my side. The evidence was undeniable. Karen had crossed a line so bold, so arrogant, that no HOA rulebook could shield her. And still she showed up at the next HOA meeting, clipboard in hand, hair sprayed into an unholy helmet, announcing, "We will not tolerate hazardous negligence in our neighborhood." The room was silent. For once, not a single head nodded. She looked around panicked, as if realizing her kingdom had slipped through her fingers. Then she glared at me, spat, "This isn't over," and stormed out. But everyone knew it was over. Or rather, it was about to be. Because the courtroom showdown was coming, and this time Karen wouldn't just lose a tree fight. She'd lose everything. There's a point in every neighborhood war where you stop reacting and start hunting. That point came the night after Karen served me. I sat at my dining table, the lawsuit spread out like a greasy menu, and realized I had two options: complain to friends and pray for sanity, or turn my house into a command center and treat this like a project with a budget timeline, deliverables. I chose the second. Step 1, facts. Not Karen's facts, facts. I started with a master timeline. On a yellow legal pad, I drew a straight line and marked the week of the fall. I penciled in everything with receipts, hotel, check-in times, attraction tickets, gas station timestamps, the stupid souvenir funnel cake my daughter insisted on photographing at 8:07 a.m., 20 minutes before the first chainsaw revved back home. Even my phone's health app logged my steps at a water park while my oak was being murdered. I pulled down every photo and video from our phones, dropped them into a labeled folder, exported the metadata. No one was going to say, "Maybe your clock was off." Not a chance. Step 2, paper trail. Karen lives by paper clipboard, notices minutes, so I buried her in it. I requested in writing copies of every HOA communication referencing my property for the past year. The board sputtered, stalled, and finally complied when my lawyer cited the member inspection clause from the bylaws. The packet arrived thick as a phone book. I flagged everything with my address, her safety concern emails riddled with adjectives, the violation slip signed in her loopy signature, the board minutes where she raised issue of obstructive heritage tree. In none of those documents, none was there any authorization for emergency removal. Plenty of hot air, 0 votes, 0 resolutions. Step 3, government records. I filed a public records request with the city for permits issued on my parcel and Karen's parcel for the last 6 months. The response came back quick: no permits, no inspections, no contact. The arborist's preliminary note from the day of the fall: healthy specimen, cut at base, no storm event, no permit visible, was attached like a little gold star. Step 4, the ghosts with chainsaws. Remember the truck that slithered away dragging rope like a guilty tail? The plate I filmed paid dividends. The officer's report gave us a registered owner, a guy 2 towns over with a list of traffic infractions and a landscaping license that had expired years ago. My lawyer subpoenaed him for deposition, along with the 2 men he'd texted at 5:36 a.m. that day. 1-day removal, cash, no city BS. When those 3 sat down across from us, hats off hands, rough eyes flicking to the door, we didn't go in hot. We went in quiet. My lawyer is a polite guillotine. "Gentlemen," he started, "who hired you?" "Lady," the foreman said. "Pink sweater, clipboard. Said her tree was dangerous." "Where did she say the tree stood?" "Here lot." "Did you verify the boundary?" Blank looks. The foreman shrugged. She pointed. "Did she show a permit?" "No." "Why did you begin cutting at dawn?" "Lady said do it early before the busybodies come out." Her words. The foreman kept glancing at me, then at my lawyer. Sweat slicked his neck. When we slid a printed still frame across the table, Karen mid-command, one hand up like a traffic cop, he sighed. "That's her." And when the trunk started to go, "We tried pulling it with the truck," he admitted. "No room to drop it clean. I told her it was tight, needed a bucket truck and road closure, but she said no extra equipment, no city, just do it." When it leaned wrong, rope snapped. "You left the scene." "Didn't want a scene," he muttered. "You have one," my lawyer said pleasantly, "but you won't be the star. Thank you for your honesty." Step 5, money. Not mind the trees. The city arborist recommended an independent consulting arborist. someone who testifies for and against municipalities, who doesn't care about HOA gossip, only calipers and charts. He arrived with instruments like a doctor from a century ago, diameter tapes, increment borers, a laser hypsometer. He took measurements, samples, photos, and then sat at my table, explaining the cold math of tree valuation. "You don't price a tree like a lawn chair," he said. "You use trunk formula method for large specimens. Species potential diameter, condition rating, location rating, contribution to landscape. You also consider age and whether it's historically significant." "Historically significant," I echoed. He nodded at the oak stump through the window. "There's a reason this neighborhood looks like a brochure when that canopy leafs out. This tree wasn't just shade, it anchored the streetscape." His report landed a week later, 50 pages of diagrams, photos, and a number that made me sit down, high six figures at full replacement value, with adjustments landing just below the kind of total that makes insurance adjusters update their blease. "LinkedIn. We're going to ask for it all," my lawyer said, eyes glittering. "Tree value, stump removal, restoration, legal fees, and punitive damages for the willful nature of the act. Step 6, control the narrative." Karen had been flooding the neighborhood with fiction. I didn't play that game. I posted a single factual update in the HOA forum, dates the permit response, none the city arborist preliminary, and a polite request that neighbors direct any questions to official records. No adjectives, no name-calling, just receipts. The thread filled with cautious support, and a few brave I saw her out there telling them what to do. Karen replied with a novella about community safety and years of neglect, and for the first time no one piled on beneath her. The comment box stared back at her like an empty auditorium. Step 7, turn the bylaws into a boomerang. Buried in the HOA bylaws beneath the font crimes and passive-aggressive semicolons was a clause Karen loved to cite at people. Members shall not obstruct, damage, or alter landscaping of common interest or neighboring property without written consent and required permits. She had practically embroidered it on throw pillows for other people. We cited it back. In our counterclaim, right after trespass and conversion, lawyer speak for you, stole my tree by cutting it down, we quoted her favorite rule and attached a photo of Karen at the scene, like a museum label, exhibit a cell phone. Discovery became a parade of receipts. We got her text to the foreman, cash ready, no permits, don't talk to the guy next door. We got her email to the HOA board the night before, I am initiating an emergency removal at dawn. Don't worry, I'll handle it. The president testified he never saw the email until after, because he filters her messages to a separate folder. That made the court reporter snort, which may be unprofessional, but I understood. We obtained a copy of her initial statement to Police Tree, fell naturally, and set it beside her complaint he hired men to cut it like two clashing cymbals. In the margins of our copy, my lawyer wrote, "Pick a lie and stick with it." By the time mediation rolled around, Karen's posture had shifted from victory to victim to venom. She arrived in a stiff blazer, clutching a binder, flanked by a lawyer with a perpetually collapsing tie knot. We presented our package, the timeline, the permits response, the arborist report, the crew depositions, the HOA minutes, the emails, the photos, the video, the plate, the police report. It was like unrolling a tapestry of consequence. Karen's lawyer cleared his throat. "Our client is willing to consider a mutual walk away. Each side bears its own costs." My lawyer blinked, then smiled like a man presented with a Groupon for a yacht. "No. Karen slammed her bin or shoot. You're ruining me. You hired men to ruin a tree," I said evenly, "and then you sued me when your plan went sideways." She jabbed a finger. "I warned you for months. You ignored me. You warned." The law answered. "You didn't like the answer, so you tried to make your own." The mediator tried 3 times to find a middle. There wasn't one. You cannot half-cut a tree, and you cannot half-tell the truth. As we packed up, Karen leaned across the table, voice low. "You think the court will side with you because you're calm, because you're reasonable." She spat the last word like it tasted bad. Courts hate conflict. "They'll split it, they'll give me something." "They might," I said, "but the facts won't." Back home, I walked to the stump. The rings were a history book, tight years, fat years, a black seam that might have been a drought. I touched the smooth, indecent face of the cut and promised the yard a new sentinel someday. Not a replacement, the oak was irreplaceable, but a continuation. That evening, the HOA president knocked on my door, hat in hand, the posture of a man ready to apologize for existing. "We're, suspending Karen from the architectural committee pending the outcome," he mumbled. "Also about those violation notices, we're rescinding them." "And the policy on emergency removals?" I asked. We'll be drafting clarifications, he said, which is HOA, for we just learned the hard way what the law already said. I closed the door and laughed for the first time in weeks. Not with triumph, more like relief. The tide had turned. The facts were lined up like dominoes. All that was left was the push. On the morning of the hearing, I put on a suit that fit like a decision. My wife squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens, you did right," she said. "I did paperwork," I smiled. "Same thing," she said. "Around here." We walked into the courthouse with a banker's box and left the drama at the door. Karen was already inside, posture, ramrod, straight eyes hard. When the bailiff called the case, I felt that small, steady thing inside me again resolve, take a deep breath, and stand taller. This wasn't about winning a feud anymore. It was about teaching the cul-de-sac a language it had forgotten: boundaries, permits, consequences. It was about showing my kids that when someone cuts down what's yours and then tries to make you pay for their mess, you don't scream louder, you get your receipts in order, you let the truth do the heavy lifting. The judge took the bench. Papers shuffled. The clerk swore us in. "Counsel," the judge said, peering over glasses, "call your first witness." My lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we call the city arborist." Karen exhaled a tiny involuntary sound. The kind you make when you realize the story you wrote in your head has been replaced by the one carved in wood. The courthouse smelled like paper, and polished, the kind of place where whispers echo louder than shouts. I'd never been in one for more than jury duty, and now here I was, center stage in a drama that started with a tree and ballooned into a war. Karen sat at the opposite table in a stiff navy blazer, her pink cardigan nowhere in sight. Maybe her lawyer told her that looking like the pastel tyrant of the cul-de-sac wouldn't play well with a judge. Her posture was rigid, chin up, like she was queen of the courtroom. But the tapping of her foot under the table betrayed her nerves. Her lawyer shuffled papers nervously. My lawyer, in contrast, leaned back with a calm that made me wonder if he'd been born in a courtroom. He'd prepared me for this moment like a coach before a championship game. Answer directly, stay calm, let her bury herself. The judge entered, robes sweeping, and the room rose. "Be seated." His gavel tapped once. "Case number 1842, Peterson versus Martin." Karen's lawyer launched into his opening statement with all the confidence of a man selling swampland. He painted Karen as a victim, a poor homeowner whose negligent neighbor refused to remove a dangerous tree. He waved his hands dramatically about community safety and willful disregard. At one point, he actually used the phrase "ticking time bomb." I kept a straight face, but inside I was laughing. This wasn't a Hollywood movie. There was no jury to wow, only a judge with years of experience sniffing out exaggeration. Then my lawyer stood. He didn't pace. He didn't wave his arms. He simply walked to the center, hands clasped behind his back. "Your Honor, this case is not about negligence. It is about trespass, destruction of property, and dishonesty. The plaintiff did not suffer because my client failed in his duty. She suffered because she took matters into her own hands illegally. She hired unlicensed workers to trespass, cut down a protected oak tree that was not hers, and when that tree fell on her own home, she tried to shift the blame." He let the words hang in the air. "We will prove this with documents, witnesses, and video evidence." The judge nodded once. "Proceed." First witness, the city arborist. A calm woman in khakis and a collared shirt, she looked like she'd stepped out of a nature documentary. She explained how she inspected the stump the day the tree fell, how it was a healthy specimen, no signs of disease or rot. She described the clean saw cuts, the lack of storm damage, and confirmed this tree was deliberately cut. Karen's lawyer tried to rattle her. "Isn't it true that healthy trees can fall unexpectedly?" "From time to time, yes," she said, "but they do not fall with a chainsaw pattern at the base and sawdust strewn across the lawn." The courtroom chuckled. Even the judge allowed himself the hint of a smile. Next, the unlicensed crew. They shuffled in like schoolboys called to the principal's office. Under oath, they admitted Karen hired them, paid in cash, told them no permit was needed because the tree was on her land. They described her, pointing, instructing, even rushing them to start before sunrise. Karen squirmed, cheeks blotchy red. Her lawyer objected, claimed the men were unreliable witnesses with criminal records. The judge cut him off. "They're here under subpoena, counsel." Objection overruled. Then came my turn. I walked to the witness stand, hand raised, swore to tell the truth. My lawyer guided me through the timeline, the vacation receipts, the phone call from the lawyer's office, my return to find the tree across her house. I produced the video. I filmed the chainsaws, the stump, the property marker, Karen herself standing smugly on her driveway. The screen flickered as the footage played. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Her lawyer objected to narration, but the judge allowed it. "Sir," my lawyer asked, Did you at any point hire these men to cut your tree? No. Did you grant permission to Mrs. Peterson to remove it? No. Were you present at the time of the cutting? No. I was out of town with my family. Receipts and photos confirm our location. Karen's lawyer tried to cross-examine. Isn't it true, Mr. Martin, that you refused multiple requests from my client to remove the tree despite clear evidence of hazard? I met his gaze. There was no evidence of hazard. The arborist confirmed it was healthy. It was protected by law. What I refused was bullying. Bullying, he echoed as if offended. Yes, Mrs. Peterson didn't want the tree because it blocked her view. That's not a hazard. That's a preference. A murmur swept through the spectators. Even the court reporter paused long enough to glance up. When it was Karen's turn, she strutted to the stand like she was about to receive an award. Under oath, she put on her best performance. She spoke of sleepless nights of worrying the tree would crush her children, of begging me to act. She even dabbed at fake tears with a tissue she clearly brought for that purpose. Why did you take action yourself? Her lawyer asked gently. Because no one else would protect the neighborhood, she sniffled. I did it for everyone's safety. Did you hire workers to cut the tree? She hesitated. I may have spoken to some men about it, but only because he ignored me for months. Did you have a permit? Silence. Mrs. Peterson. No, she whispered. And yet you claim it was his negligence. Yes, she said louder, glaring at me. Because if he'd done the right thing, none of this would have happened. My lawyer stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Peterson, on the day of the incident, you told police the tree fell naturally. Correct. Yes, she said quickly. But in your complaint, you allege that my client hired workers to cut it. Which is it? She faltered. I was confused. It was traumatic. Confused enough to stand on your driveway, giving instructions to those very workers. Her face drained of color. That's not... He slid the photo across the table. Is this you? Karen stared at it, lips trembling. Finally she muttered, yes. The courtroom buzzed. My lawyer delivered the coup de grace. So to summarize, you trespassed, you hired unlicensed workers, you cut a protected tree without a permit, and when it fell on your own house, you sued my client for negligence. Is that correct? Garen exploded. He should have cut it down. Who brought this on himself? Order, the judge barked, gavel slamming. The room fell silent. Karen sank into her chair, shaking with fury. When the closing arguments finished, the judge leaned back, hands steepled. He took a long pause, scanning the documents, the photos, the stump measurements, the receipts. Finally, he spoke. This court finds that the defendant, Mr. Martin, is not liable for damages to the plaintiff's home. The evidence shows conclusively that Mrs. Peterson acted without consent, without permits, and in violation of both city law and HOA bylaws. Furthermore, the court finds that Mrs. Peterson is liable for trespass and destruction of property. Damages are awarded to the defendant in the amount of, he flipped a page, $240,000, reflecting the appraised value of the oak tree, plus costs of removal attorney's fees and punitive damages. Karen gasped as though he'd stabbed her. Her lawyer slumped like a balloon losing air. My lawyer smiled faintly, slid me a note that read, "We won." I sat back, exhaling a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for months. Around me, neighbors whispered. Some looked relieved, some looked stunned. All of them now knew the truth. Karen rose wild-eyed and pointed at me one last time. You think you've won. You've ruined me. You've ruined me. The judge banged his gavel. Remove her. 2 bailiffs escorted her out, still spitting rage. Her voice echoed down the hallway long after the doors closed. This isn't over, but it was. For once, the law had spoken louder than Karen, and it spoke in numbers she couldn't ignore. The judgment landed like a clean axe stroke, decisive, final, and echoing. But courts don't hand you closure in a box with a bow. They hand you orders. Then you live with the paperwork and the ripples. Within a week, Karen's attorney proposed a payment plan. My client's finances are constrained, he wrote, as if the word might disguise the crater. The judge set terms anyway, monthly payments indexed to interest, attorney's fees, upfront, stump removal immediate, and a 90-day deadline to bring her property out of hazardous condition. There was a line in there that made me reread it. Any demolition or structural work must be permitted and performed by licensed contractors. I almost laughed. Imagine that permits. Her insurance company unsurprisingly denied her claim. Acts of intentional misconduct, the letter said, void coverage. She appealed. They sent the court's findings back with a polite no. The tarp on her roof fluttered like a flag of surrender while the neighborhood watched the consequences settle in. I took no victory laps. I had a stump to mourn and kids who needed normalcy. We planted a white oak sapling in the same sightline as the old giant. Not a replacement, nothing could replace a century and a half, but a promise. My son named it Second Chance. My daughter tied a green ribbon around its stake. We watered it at dusk, and I told them about rings and time and how some things you start for people you'll never meet. Then I did something small that felt big. I took down the binder labeled Karen's Greatest Hits and slid it into a file box in the attic. I wasn't going to let her live rent-free in my head any longer. The HOA pretended to be shocked by the verdict, even though half of them had testified. At the next meeting, the president cleared his throat and announced governance reforms, a phrase that in HOAs translates to, "We got burned, and now we read the bylaws we wrote." Emergency actions would require a supermajority and city coordination. Unauthorized contact with contractors on another member's property would be grounds for immediate removal from any committee. The room nodded. Karen's chair sat empty, a pink ghost haunting the proceedings. She wasn't done haunting, though. She still lived across the street behind her sagging tarp and brittle pride. For the first week after the verdict, she stormed around like a wind-up toy, jabbing at phones, pointing at the sky, whispering to anyone who would look like a castaway signaling ships. Fewer and fewer ships sailed by. You can only tell people the sun rises in the west for so long before they stop checking your weather. The twist came wrapped in city letterhead. 3 weeks after judgment, I got a copy of a compliance notice sent to Karen by the Urban Forestry Office. It referenced the very ordinance she'd ignored. Because the removed specimen was classified as heritage, mitigation is required at a ratio of 6:1. Karen would not only pay me for the lost oak, she was now ordered to plant 6 new trees of specified caliber and species on her property within 6 months and maintain them for 3 years under inspection. Failure to comply may result in additional fines and liens. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't imagining the poetry. The woman who cut down a protected tree to restore her view had been ordered to build a forest. I didn't gloat, not out loud, but I did show my wife, and we sat on the porch steps quiet and a little awed at how perfectly the world sometimes writes its own punchlines. Karen, of course, appealed. The city denied it. When the certified envelope arrived, she opened it at her mailbox, skimmed the page, and let out a sound like a tea kettle boiling over. The next morning, a nursery truck pulled up and unloaded 6 bald and burlap saplings, 2 oaks, 2 maples, a sweet gum, and a tulip poplar. The crew, very much licensed, planted them in the front yard while Karen paced like a cat forced into a bath. Neighbors pretended not to watch. I tried not to smile. My daughter waved at the workers and said, "Thank you for planting more shade." One of the guys grinned. "Happy to," he said, tamping soil. Meanwhile, her payment plan ticked. Every month a check arrived, sometimes late, always resentful. My lawyer had set up automatic reminders and penalties. The cold clockwork of consequence kept time. I funneled nearly all of it into savings and restoration, soil remediation, where the root plate had torn through my lawn, a native understory plan from the arborist serviceberry redbud ferns drip irrigation to shepherd's second chance through summer. On Saturday mornings, I'd sit on the new back deck. Yes, I built one. Yes, she could see it and drink coffee under the sketch of shade that would someday be a canopy. There were other ripples. The contractor who'd cut and run took a plea on municipal violations in exchange for testimony, paid his fines, and from what the officer told me, started the long crawl back to legitimacy. The HOA elections that year delivered a small revolution, 3 new board members who ran on a platform of sanity, not surveillance. The president remained chastened and cooperative, a man who learned you can't govern by complaint alone. And the neighborhood, it exhaled. The gossip decibel dropped. We started talking to each other again about barbecues and school drives instead of bylaws and boundary lines. People waved more. A couple down the street asked where I got my mulch. Someone left a thank you note in my mailbox for standing up without shouting. Even Karen's husband changed shape. He mowed quietly, head down, once looked at me like he wanted to say something, and then didn't. One evening I found him standing near the smallest of the 6 saplings, staring at it the way you look at a road you didn't choose. I gave him a nod. He nodded back, small reel, and walked inside. The roof got fixed in stages, cheap patch, then better patch, then finally months later a proper repair. It never matched perfectly. A house remembers its wounds. Mine did too. I kept the cut face of the oak one thick, clean disc as a tabletop in my office. I sanded it, sealed it, and set it on hairpin legs. The rings are a map of patience. When paperwork gets loud, I run a fingertip along a drought year, then a flush year, and remember the slow arithmetic of roots and rain. If you're waiting for me to say Karen changed, I'll disappoint you. She didn't. People like her seldom swap out the engine, they just downshift the noise. She still files petty complaints now, more carefully worded, the legalese scrubbed of the old swagger. She still glares from her porch if my kids laugh too loudly. Once she muttered, "Enjoy your charity," when a payment went out late and penalties kicked in. I said, "Enjoy your forest," and left it there. The real change happened in me. Before this, I would have met aggression with appeasement, hoping to minimize the drama. Keep the peace, we say, like peace is something you can loan bullies. But there's a difference between being neighborly and being a doormat with a mortgage. Boundaries aren't rudeness. They're kindness with a spine. One last twist arrived in a manila envelope from the Historical Society. The city arborist had quietly sent them my photos. They'd tracked old maps and land grants and found a diary entry from 1,890 camped beneath the great oak by the Creek Road good shade. They sent me a copy along with a certificate naming the spot a heritage landscape. No tax credits, no gold plaque, just a sentence acknowledging what the tree had been, a guardian, a witness, a landmark. It felt like a funeral and a christening at once. That night, we ate dinner on the deck while dusk painted the street. The 6 saplings across the way lifted small, stubborn leaves. Second Chance cast a baby shadow across our yard. The air smelled like watered soil and possibility. Karen came out to collect her mail. I raised a hand. She stared, then looked past me, then went inside without a word. That was fine. I wasn't waving for her. I was waving at the future. "Will it ever be as big as the old one?" my daughter asked, chin on the railing eyes on our little oak. "Maybe not in my lifetime," I said. "But that's the thing about planting. You do it for people you'll never meet, and for the person you become while you wait." We sat there, not winning, not losing, just living, and in a neighborhood that once felt like a courtroom that was the sweetest verdict I could imagine. If a tree taught me anything, it's that strength isn't loud. It's patient. People like Karen mistake volume for power. But power, the kind that lasts, is built the way a tree builds, rings quietly, one boundary at a time. I thought keeping the peace meant giving inch after inch until there was nothing left to stand on. This mess taught me that true peace requires lines you will not let anyone cross: your land, your time, your dignity. Stand up without screaming. Document instead of detonating. When someone tries to make their emergency your responsibility, remember you didn't start the fire, they did. Get your facts straight, your allies steady, your permits in order. Let the truth do the heavy lifting. And when justice finally arrives, don't let bitterness take root. Plant something better. It might be a literal sapling. It might be a new habit, walking away from pointless fights, waving at the neighbor who doesn't deserve it, showing your kids what resilience looks like in work boots. If this story hit home, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Have you faced a petty tyrant with a clipboard, or a coworker or a relative who tried to rewrite the rules? Drop your experience in the comments so others can learn from it. And if you want more real HOA dramas with receipts, subscribe and ring the bell. Around here, we plant boundaries and we let karma handle the pruning.